Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today we are talking about a book that I really enjoyed quite recently, that being Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. This was very nearly a Red Company read-along book, and for those of you who don't know, the Red Company is the Sun Eater fan Discord that I helped moderate, and we do some read-alongs every month or two, basically, as kind of a group. Some of us participate in doing that. Red Rabbit was nearly voted to be a read-along book for that in February. When it wasn't, I decided to just go ahead and read it anyway because I was in a Western mood. Furthermore, I knew that a sequel, or I actually discovered that a sequel was going to be coming out pretty shortly afterwards, about halfway through March. At the time that I'm recording this video, the book pretty much literally just came out, so I figured that reading this in February was as good a time as any to actually give it a shot. So yeah, that's basically the preliminary discussion on Red Rabbit. Let's talk about how I actually felt about the book, starting off just as I always do with the good. And the first thing that I gotta shout out with this thing is the vibes. They're just so good. If you are a vibes reader, there's a lot about this that is likely to click for you. And that is because if you were to label this book with the genre, I would call this a supernatural Western. It's set in a, very shortly post-Civil War type of Midwest setting, but the supernatural Western vibe is the thing that really sets this apart for me. I think that even if you don't love Western, the vibes of the book are so immaculate that you'll probably click or hook onto something regardless, and be able to enjoy it. If you're somebody who enjoys, let's say, The Dark Tower by Stephen King, where there are kind of some supernatural stuff going on there, some weird things going on there, and at times it has a lot of Western feel, but it's not precisely a Western. I think this is the next step from that type of vibe in a more Western direction. It's obviously very much a Western book, but it's got the supernatural vibe going on. It's got several other focuses that aren't just to the setting, to such a degree that I think that even if you don't love Westerns, that you'll probably still enjoy generally what this book is going for from a tonal perspective. I think that even if you don't love horror either, since supernatural is kind of a horror type of thing, the fantasy lightness of the supernatural aspects are really addicting and enjoyable to read. I found that material quite engaging, actually. I also think that the setting of the book itself is very convincing and engaging. And by setting, I mean the multiple locations in which you end up over the course of the narrative from a couple of different characters' perspectives, but all the primary locations just feel very rich and deep and actually worth spending time in as a reader. So there was definitely that I appreciated. Furthermore, as far as the supernatural horror elements are concerned, I would say that these aspects of the book are pretty surprising and generally spectacular. I love the way that life and death are explored thematically within the book. I love the way the fictional folklore of the world abets the supernatural exploration as well, because there are certain things that Alex Grecian does here that are pretty unique to this particular interpretation of the world, that really sell that, make it come alive more its own rather than just being, oh, it's a Western setting. No, there's a little bit more here that makes it its own thing that I really appreciated. I also love that Alex makes the world his own by these aspects. Kind of as I said, it's more its own thing. It's a little bit more diverse. It's not a simple setting, but it's not a complex one. It's not hard to understand or anything like that. It's just there's more to it than simply what you might assume by, say, reading a description of it or something like that. The ideas of the book overall are pretty fresh and surprisingly believable, even in the strictly unbelievable sense. And as I said, even though the setting feels a little bit more unique, it's not a complex book, so none of these aspects are hard to put together or hard to understand in any meaningful way. I also think there's a very sharp character focus in unique settings in this book. Every character feels very distinct and different from one another, never feeling like a token character either. So you have a dynamic of characters being included that in a lot of other instances from a lot of less talented authors or creators of some sense, you'd end up including some of these elements, I guess, some of these people, these characters, and feel like they're just there to be there. No, they all feel like actual people. They feel like real characters. They feel like people that you could actually meet and talk to. They feel like people I've met before in some cases. So there's a very grounded approach to the characters that I think is really great about the book. There's also new characters added pretty regularly throughout the book, which add new dynamics to the general plot and the story, and also to other characters as well. And that makes the story really engaging as you continue to go along. And I think that basically every character supports the plot in their own way, even if it's just for a small stage of it in a particular location, or even if it's, across the whole book. Every character serves a particular purpose in the plot that is engaging and meaningful, but again, without ever feeling like they're just there to exist or like they're just some simple plot device. They're real people, but Alex knows how to use them in such a way that it's like, you know what, it was worth totally meeting this character. But on the topic of the plot itself as well, I'd say the target of the plot is set very early in the book and has stages yet never wavers. So you'll have a lot of books that you read these days where you kind of have an idea of what the plot's going to do. Then you have like some subversions and twists there. You have things that kind of complicate that. You have a lot of that in here as well. But I would say the direct focus of the actual plot of the story is definitely not something that Alex tries to, use to twist around a reader's mind. It's like, where these characters are going. They are going that direction. There are things that are going to happen along the way, but that end goal is still always in sight. And I generally liked the way that the book was structured as a result. The standard plot structure is very, very well explored in the book. The rising action is brilliantly paced, in my opinion. The extended climactic sequence is never too little nor too much from any perspective, really. The stakes also involved throughout the entirety of the novel, very expertly set, so you never feel like something's way over the top, but you also don't ever feel like anything's a little bit too below the pay grade of any of the characters. So all of that is really great. I also just feel like your time's never being wasted by the book. It's not spending too much of your internal RAM, your active memory. There's plenty of things going on, but it's not just wasted material. It's all like, oh, if I need to remember this character, or if I'm going to remember this character, it means there's a reason that I'm remembering them, and that's great. Not all books utilize their word count or all of their elements so efficiently. Alex Grecian definitely utilizes everything super efficiently in here. And as one final point on the topic of the story, I would say the story itself never drags. The characters also always make it very worth following. So, kind of wrapping up my thoughts on both the characters and the story there. And, well, I guess there is another point that I could make about the story, and that is that the resolution of Red Rabbit is, well, it's unlike the vast majority that I've read. Nigh on every relevant character in the book gets a chance to say their goodbye here. The main characters get part 7 of the book, like the entirety of part 7. A bunch of the side characters get a sort of like, 10-page epilogue of sorts that comes at the very end of part 7, but doesn't have an actual chapter number above it or anything like that. So I call it an epilogue. And only a handful of minor exceptions exist to the idea of every character getting a chance to say goodbye or getting a resolution as a result of every character getting to do this in the book and the plot actually coming to fruition. Basically, the way that it was set forth from the very beginning, some things rise up in the middle that kind of change that a little bit, but not so much so as to make the ending any different than maybe you might expect for it to be. It's not predictable so much as it is just very much set on like following through with the promises that it sets. The resolution is so good. In fact, I would say the resolution of the book is just so good that I'm almost wary of reading the sequel here at some point. But to move on to the bad for Red Rabbit, the interesting thing about this is the first time in a very long time, if frankly ever really, this almost never happens on the channel, where there's like nothing that I could really put in the bad that I genuinely feel like is a detractor to the story, or that I feel like is going to be such a major, I guess a roadblock for any particular reader so as to make them notable. Like, I'm very hard pressed to actually come up with anything that I think is actively bad about this book. Like, I guess maybe some people might think that the rules associated with some of the supernatural stuff doesn't entirely, it's not even that it doesn't make sense, it's just that it's not fully explained. But when it comes right down to it, it's the supernatural. Was the supernatural ever explained? And when the supernatural is explained, is that ever satisfying, or is that ever necessary? I would argue not. So I wouldn't even say that this is a bad thing. I also would say that if you don't like Western, that might be a bad thing for you in here, because Westerns aren't for everyone. That is absolutely the case, but it's not the only part of this book, kind of as I tried to explain earlier, and the horror isn't very brutal either, so even if the genres that this book aren't your thing, I don't really see those specifically really making much of a resistance to your personal enjoyment. The ugly of the book is, as I ended the good, basically just that I'm a little bit wary of a sequel for Red Rabbit because the resolution of the book is so good, it almost feels unnecessary. I know where a sequel could go, or at least some of the ideas it could explore, or at the very least, where a sequel could start, because there's a couple things left somewhat open-ended at the end of Red Rabbit, but definitely not enough where I'm like, this book needs a sequel. So I'll still probably read the sequel someday, but I'm not 100% sure if it was necessary. We'll see when I read it, for sure. So for the recommendation, I guess the recommendation is super easy this time around. I think even if you don't like Westerns, or even if you don't particularly like horror, there might just be something that you really like about this book. So I recommend Red Rabbit heartily. I seriously do. And besides, like, the book isn't even that super long. It's like 450 pages, which to some people sounds like a lot, but like the size of this hardcover and the general formatting of the text makes it a really quick read. I could personally read about 60 pages of this in less than an hour and a half, and that is way quick for me. My general reading pace is usually more like 20 to 30 pages an hour if I'm lucky, let alone the like 45-ish pages that I would say I could read in an hour of Red Rabbit. So, and I'm a slow reader, mind you. That means that most people would absolutely plow through this thing in basically no time at all. So it's pretty quick. Even though 450 pages sounds like a lot, it's really not a lot in the context of this book at all. Again, I really recommend Red Rabbit. So if you give this a shot, or if you gave this a shot rather, let me know what you thought as well. I want this book to kind of be shouted from the rooftops because it's one of my favorites in the recent past. Really enjoyed basically everything about it, and I hope that everybody else does as well. I'm sure that I'm overselling the book. I'm sure that some of my praises are going to sound a little bit exaggerating to certain people who read it. I'm sure there's going to be some people who read the book or have read the book and are going to comment like, I don't know particularly why all of these things clicked so well for you, but like, I really enjoyed it, and that's why I'm recommending it to you. So if you did read it, let me know what you thought in the comments below. I would greatly appreciate hearing that. I hope it clicks for you as much as it did for me. And also thank you to my friend Orion, fellow moderator and the actual owner of the Red Company Discord, for recommending this to me. Orion's the reason that this was ever on my radar, so I appreciate that for sure. Thank you. And thank you as well for watching this video. If you did, I really appreciate that. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.